Hey guys, this is Leah from Bounce Life with Leah. I'm a holistic integrated health coach, and today I really wanted to continue our talk about fats. If you remember from our first video, I talked about what the different types of fats are that you eat, and I specifically went over saturated versus unsaturated fats. So if you haven't seen that yet, I would really recommend you go back and watch it, because today it's kind of piggybacking off of that talk, and it would actually help understand what I'm going to talk about today if you go back and watch that video. So today I wanted to talk about the fats that you must eat and the ones that you really should avoid. And yes, there are fats that you have to eat, and there are fats that you really should avoid. Majority of the foods is kind of bio-individual, and depending on where you are and what you're doing, I don't really like to say these are things that you have to eat, but there are certain things that you do have to eat. And the same thing with avoid. I try not to demonize many foods, because to each their own. As long as you're happy, healthy, I really don't care what you're eating most of the time, as long as you feel your best. I make suggestions, sure, of course, but there really are certain things that I would avoid, and that category is really small. So the fats that you really should eat are the omegas. You might have heard about the omegas, because people are always saying, oh, make sure you get your omega-3s and blah, 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 right? So the omega-3s and technically the omega-6s are the only two fats that you really have to make sure that you're eating. Other fats, yeah, it's good for certain reasons, but the reason why you don't have to eat maybe the other ones the same way is because the omegas are what we call essential fatty acids. And what essential means is these are things that your body needs to live and survive, but you have to get them from an outside source. So a lot of nutrients that you don't technically need to eat from an outside source, because your body can make it if it has to. For example, glucose. If you watched my carb video, I talked about why we need glucose from carbs. So technically, yes, you can eat glucose, but your body can make it. So it's not deemed essential, because your body can technically make it on its own if it has to. Same thing with the majority of the fats. So our phospholipids or cholesterol, majority of the triglycerides, your body can technically make on its own. But there are two fatty acids that you have to make sure that you eat. And as I mentioned, those are the omegas. So we have omega-3 and omega-6. Omega-6. Right? So these guys you have to eat from food source, because these guys are used as building blocks to make a lot of important structures inside of our body that have their hand in a lot of functions. So like our brain health, our heart health, our immunity, our nervous system, they all require these things, these different structures in order to function. And those structures need omega-3 and omega-6s to be built, if that makes sense, right? So you have to make sure you're eating these guys in order to make sure those processes are continuing and moving, okay? So you hear a lot more about omega-3s than 6s, because omega-6s are in a lot of everyday foods, so it's not really too much a concern. There are also a lot of processed foods, because they are in a lot of oils that are used, so most people actually get probably too much omega-6s, but people are not getting enough omega-3s, because omega-3s is where they only really come from whole-based foods, unless you take a supplement or something. But a lot of people are focusing too much on packaged foods and processed foods and not enough real food, so therefore they're not getting enough omega-3s. So if that's you, you kind of want to think about what you're doing, right? So omega-3s, in addition to only coming from whole-based foods, the range of foods that they're in is kind of limited. So you can only really get them from anything that comes from the ocean, right? So seafood, fish, shellfish, any sort of sea plants, right? Like kelp or nori or something like that. So if you don't eat those things, you can also get them from some nuts and seeds. So like walnuts, chia seeds, flax seeds, hemp seeds. Leafy greens also have omega-3s. So you can see it's not really a huge variety of foods, but they're foods that, unless you're really focusing on eating a varied diet all the time, you probably could be missing omega-3s. So if you want to think about, okay, when's the last time I ate fish? When's the last time I ate nuts? All those things. So that's what you really have to think about this. So omega-3s only really come from whole-based foods, and they come from foods that a good portion of the population are not getting enough of, which is why you hear a lot about omega-3s and why there's a big push for fish oil supplements and stuff like that, because obviously supplements, big market. So you can technically eat a fish oil pill and you can get some omega-3s that way. I would not be solely dependent on that, but it's also an option. Okay, so omega-3s, again, real food, seafood, sea vegetables, nuts, seeds, leafy greens. Omega-6s are coming from a lot of everyday foods. They're in a lot of everyday oils, so it's not too much of a concern. Okay, hope that makes sense. Let me know if you guys have any questions about that, and I'll be happy to answer it. Okay, so where are the 3s and the 6s coming from? Oops, almost dropped my pen. So if you remember our unsaturated fat talk. So what was an unsaturated fat? So these were long chains of carbon atoms, right? There's an acid group on the end, right? That's where the name fatty acid comes from. And they're all flanked by hydrogens. So if you remember, these fatty acids are long chains of carbons with a lot of hydrogens around them. So I'm just going to draw all the hydrogens. Okay, so omega-3s, we'll start with that, okay? So omega-3, I know, I have like the worst handwriting, I'm sorry. That's coming from a type of unsaturated fat. So if you remember, unsaturated fats have double bonds, okay? So omega-3 really is just telling you where that double bond is. That's it. It's a chemistry thing, right? So I should also mention that when you're talking about, oh man, I really suck at writing on words. So omega, if you look to the structure, you can kind of classify it into pieces. And again, this is something really only chemists care about, but I'm just going to show you just because it helps illustrate what I'm going to talk about. So this end with the carbons, we would call that the omega end, and then this end with the acid group is the alpha end. Again, obviously only chemists really care about this stuff. But since we're talking about omega-3s, obviously omega, that's where the name is coming from. So 3 refers to which carbon the double bond is on. So if we're counting from the omega end, 1, 2, 3, we're going to put the double bond here, and then we're going to get rid of 2 hydrogens. Okay, that's it. It's just telling you 3 carbons in, double bond, omega-3, boom, done. So for omega-6, what do you think? 6 carbons in, right? Not that hard. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'll put it here. Omega-6. That's it. 6 in, omega-6. That's all. That's just where the name comes from. All right. So again, omega-3s and 6s, those are our essential fatty acids. We have to get them from an outside source because they're used for really a lot of important things in our body. Like I said, our immune system, our brain, our heart, what else? Our nervous system. I mean, you can Google it and they'll give like a whole list of things that is needed. So the end of this, really the takeaway is you got to get your 3s in. Okay. Omega-6s you don't have to worry too much about because it's in majority of foods. So that brings us to, using the wrong side of my eraser. No, maybe I'm not. I don't know why it's not erasing very well. So the fats that you should avoid, these are the ones called trans fats. And again, I would imagine most people have heard of trans fats. The reason why you need to avoid trans fats, because now it's really understood that it causes a lot of problems internally, specifically around our heart. They're contributed to a lot of cardiovascular problems, and they could also be leading to heart disease. So we really want to try to avoid trans fats because there's really no reason to eat them at all. And if they're just going to cause us harm, then we probably should stay away from them. Technically, there are natural trans fats in the world. Those are not the ones I'm talking about. So the trans fats I'm talking about are the man-made ones, the synthetic ones. So these trans fats you're only going to get from processed foods. So if you're not eating a lot of processed foods, that's a good thing. You're probably avoiding trans fats anyway. But if you do eat a lot of more packaged foods, then you do have to make sure you're reading not really just labels, but ingredients, because that's really what's going to tell you. Because some labels are misleading and they'll tell you 0 trans fats, when in reality they actually do have trans fats in them. But the threshold for putting 0 is like a certain percentage can technically be in there, but I would just avoid it altogether. So the word trans fat, where is that coming from? And again, we're going to go back to our unsaturated fats, because trans fats is an unsaturated fat. So I'm going to draw our chain again. All right, I'm not going to draw all the hydrogens, just you guys know that they're there. So again, trans fats are a type of unsaturated fat. So I'm just going to put the double bond anywhere. And if you notice, I always erase the 2 hydrogens kind of below it. But for this one, I'm going to erase 1 below and 1 on top. So I'm just going to circle this so you can see it. So there's a hydrogen on top and a hydrogen on the bottom. So you can have 2 different versions of a double bond. You can have it where the hydrogens are on the same side. It doesn't matter if they're top and bottom. That doesn't matter. Or you can have them where they're on opposite sides. So the ones that are on the same side, we call these cis fats. Cis fatty acids. It just is, again, it's just telling you where the hydrogens are. Okay? It might not seem like a lot, but the difference between a hydrogen here and a hydrogen on the other side makes a big difference in what's happening internally in your body, okay? Because the cis ones, these are our natural fats. These guys your bodies can handle. These are the guys your body wants and can utilize, right, in a healthy way. As soon as you flip and put a hydrogen on the other side, all of a sudden things become really, really detrimental to our health. So yes, that placement makes a big difference, okay? So the moment you have a hydrogen on the opposite side, and again, this is technically a trans configuration. That's where trans fat comes from. That's where problems come from, okay? So, yes, chemistry explains this, and that's where the names come from, and that little switch actually makes a big difference inside our body. Cis fats, all good, all healthy, so you don't really hear about it. Trans fats, the moment you put that hydrogen on the other side, bad things can happen, okay? So that's where the name trans fats come from. It's an unsaturated fat with the double bond. The hydrogens are on opposite sides of the double bond. That's where it comes from. So then you're saying, okay, well, where does trans fats come from? So anytime you see, so this is why you have to look at ingredients. So if you're looking at the ingredients, and you see things called partially hydrogenized, right? Let's see if I can spell this. Hydrogenized. Oops. Right? Avoid it, because that means there's a trans fat there, okay? So what they're doing is they're basically turning saturated fats into unsaturated fats no, other way around. They're turning unsaturated fats into saturated fats. That's the goal, by adding hydrogen back in, okay? You're gonna be like, well, why do they do that? So if you have an unsaturated fat with the hydrogens, right? So you're saying, why would they want to add hydrogen to this? All right, so there's kind of 2 reasons for that. The first is, if you remember, unsaturated fats are liquid, and they're unstable. Not like they'll fall apart immediately, but they're not as shelf stable as a saturated fat, right? So for manufacturers, they want things to be shelf stable, right? They want it to last for a long time. So a big reason why they might add hydrogens to this, they want to make it more saturated. Just want to make sure that you can read that. I'm going to put that in quotes, right? So the idea is they want to make it more saturated-like, so they want to make it more shelf stable, okay? So they're going to add hydrogens to an unsaturated fat in order to make it more stable, okay? Or they might want to make it more solid. So if the unsaturated are liquids, why would they want to make the liquid oils more solid? So that's why a lot of trans fats were found in like margarine or those like fake butters, because you can't, oils are liquid, right? But you can't like have the consistency of butter as a butter replacement if they're liquids. So what they're going to do is try to make them more like a saturated fat, more solid, so you can, spread it on toast or whatever, or cook with it, right? So they're going to make it more saturated by adding hydrogens back into it. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So really the main two reasons were food manufacturers were making trans fats were to make it more shelf stable and to make it more solid so they can use it, okay? So they're basically trying to manipulate the structure so these fatty acids can behave more like a saturated fat. So in that process, instead of making it without a double bond more saturated, which they did, so I think there was like two different things happening. They did have the saturated fats pop out, but they also had these trans fats pop out too, and that's where the problems come in. So instead of making hydrogens all around, they ended up flipping it and putting a hydrogen on the other side, okay? I really hope I explained that right. If I didn't, please let me know and I'll do better and I'll send another video, okay? But that's really where the trans fats come from. The good news is in the United States, the FDA did ban trans fats like 5 years ago. However, they gave food companies like a really long time to fix their formulations and to fix their foods in order to, eliminate them and do something else with them. So you do still find a lot of foods that contain trans fats, right? So I'm noticing, and peanut butter is a big one. I'm noticing, I think pie crust was another one that I see trans fats in a lot. So you really have to read the ingredients. A lot of marketing trickery will come in, it'll plaster 0% trans fats or no trans fats in the package, but then you'll flip to the ingredients and it'll say partially hydrogenized something oil in there, right? So then you'll want to be like, wait a second, there's technically a trans fat in here, but the threshold for putting 0, like I said, you can Google, it's like a certain percentage, right, that can allow it to be in there, but still being able to put 0 on there, right, which is kind of not fair. So you really still want to read the ingredients. So I would always read ingredients to make sure that there's nothing in there. Okay, well, I hope that was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions about anything I discussed today. I'm still under 20 minutes, so I didn't want to make it stupid, like a really, really crazy, stupid long video. So I hope that, I gave you enough to understand. All right, but if not, let me know and I'll send out another video, or I can hopefully answer some questions and comments if you need me to as well. That's totally fine. Okay, so if you like this video, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.